Dr. John Tardif. He's taught at the school for 8 years. Was a member of the third graduating class at Immaculate Conception Academy and has a Doctor of Philosophy. I give you Dr. Tardif.
Who's supposed to talk first?
So thank you for the introduction, Ethan. So I'm honored here today to talk to this panel. And I myself, as he pointed out, am a product of this church and parish. And I have to start by thanking Father Post for baptizing me. You baptized me. I don't remember it either. A long time ago. And Dr. Wojnowski for teaching me my first philosophy class, his first year here in 2000. So I just have a few questions for each of you to help maybe shed some more light on the history of this place and how it was lived at the time. And starting with you, Father Post, since you were here first in some ways. In the very early days, what are the most memorable things you remember about Father Catherine and Father de Richer?
The most memorable things, the greatest things I remember about them? Father Catherine, we first met up with him in North Idaho. Wasn't he the one that was up in North Idaho? Yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of the parish up there, Coeur d'Alene. But when the traditionalists would come up for communion, they would always go over to his. Can you hear me okay? If you can't hear me, raise your hand. Does that make a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'm more wisecrack. What was I talking about?
We're talking about the most memorable things about Father Catherine and Father de Richer.
Yes, well, did you ever hear of, I hate to say it, but Francis Schuckart, did you ever hear of him?
Yeah.
Next subject. Well, when Father Catherine would give the communion, what are you doing?
I'm speaking to the mic so they can hear.
Gotta hold the mic, Bob.
Closer to your mouth so we can hear. Yeah. Yes.
What was I talking about? When you get old, you lose your train of thought. My train of thought got off the rails years ago, but anyway. That's why it's called post-fault. We would always go over to the side of the communion rail that Father Catherine was given the communions because we thought the others were invalid. Maybe they're for. I never got much into that, but eventually they kicked him out way down to Oakland, California, and then a few years later I started the chapel in Campbell. Anybody attend Campbell, California? Isn't that a great place? Ever since I left, though, it's fallen apart. Anyway, post hoc ergo propter hoc. That's Latin. I prevailed on him to help me out at Campbell. So a typical thing, he would say the two masters at Campbell, and I was flying off to Lord knows where. There had been about almost every place in the United States. So in any case, what did you ask me? What did you say my name is?
Just tell us a little about Father Catherine and Father de Richer.
Okay, is this on? Thank you. Father Catherine, Father Catherine, of course, was an older priest from the Redemptorists. Well, back up a little bit. Let's see,
So when you came here in '69, how did you meet this Father de Richer with Francis Schuckart?
Oh, okay. Let's see, I'm showing you. Actually, the Society of St. Pius X is my third attempt. God does things in threes. I was in the Archdiocese of San Francisco for 6.5 years. The first year of the major seminary, something just didn't feel right, so I switched. What's that? Microphone. If you know what you get, if that doesn't go off, you get the Nobel Prize. Okay. Where was I when I interrupted myself? Okay, I came out there, something just didn't feel right, so I really finished off at University of San Francisco, Berkeley, all that stuff. And then, 64, it just came out of the blue. I might have a religious vocation, and so I said, if it goes on for 3 days, I'll do something about it. It went on for 3 days. I talked to a priest, and I wrote to several orders of sisters. I didn't want to be a sister, but you know, in San Francisco, it's hard to tell the difference. I think I'll drop that right now. But anyway, I got in touch with the. Shut up. You know, anybody know French? Was that French or Spanish? That was Spanish, wasn't it? Anyway, and I got in touch with the Carmelites
You
and
finished at Carmelites, when made you come here?
what made me come here? An airline. My folks, Maria, my mother and brother Dennis are buried over in the Catholic part of the cemetery, and they wanted to go up, get out of San Francisco, that area, because it's going more, you know, San Francisco, I think it's still true, San Francisco, as far as I know, is the only major city in the country that does not have one single organized traditional mass within the borders of the city. So we went up there, we knew there are a lot of conservatives up here, and so we went up there, so sometimes it didn't make mass at all, but then we met Father Catherine right there, and then we heard about this Bishop Lefebvre, Archbishop Lefebvre. He was visiting the United States, visiting, I think it was in Pittsburgh when I flew, well, the plane flew when I was in the plane, so it's better than being outside the plane. So I met up with him, this is what I'm looking for, so we put everything together, flew over to Switzerland in, what year was 71, I think. They put me right away at the University of, I didn't know 10 words of French, and he's putting me in a French-speaking university.
Does Father Debichet write a letter of recommendation?
Yeah, the Father Debichet, that's the way he pronounced it, Debichet, letter of recommendation. And so with all that, the Archbishop accepted me, and then at the end of that first year in Switzerland, he gave me some deacon, and then he calls me into his office at a Cone. That's a long time ago. He said, well, Gregory, I'm going out to North Dakota this summer to see Brother Fred Nelson. Do you know Brother Frederick Nelson? Do you remember him? Well, how about if I ordain you a priest then? I just about fell off the floor. I'm okay. But, so I said, okay, then I came back. I couldn't believe it. He doesn't know me for a year yet. He's willing to ordain me a priest. So we came back. We went out to there and got ordained on Feast Day of St. Augustine, August 28th, 72, I think is right. And then back to one more year of studies, and then I asked if it'd be okay if I opened up mass centers, or I don't like the word chapel, it sounds Protestant, mass centers in California, which at the same time, my family was moving back down to San Jose area. Have you ever been to San Jose? Do you know the way to San Jose? That's what it says. That was a joke. So we started out, we became Campbell, and then after transferred quite a few times, and now I am here. But does that pretty much answer the question?
Well, how did you start this? How did this place get started?
We're in Post Falls, right? How did it get started? I'm trying to remember. Post Falls. Darn. Well, at the time you can't post Father, who was the elderly Redemptorist priest?
Catherine.
Catherine. He pronounced it Catherine. Had this group of traditionalists, and the Society of St. Pius X, of which they are members, started a small group. They built. There's a video all about this stuff. They bought the church, and that's how it got started way back in. That was 72, 74, I think it was. And this is going since. It's now, I think, isn't it our second biggest place in the whole country, right? It's second biggest. That's all I remember about that, man. You have to remember, this is all more than 50 years ago, and I'm not a young man anymore. I'm going to be 83 very soon. So you have to be excuse me if I don't connect all the dots. Okay? Does that answer your question? Stop throwing things at me.
Thank you, Father Post.
Thank you for leaving.
Dr. Tardif, I
Yes.
have something I can add. Father talked about his ordination, so we had this one picture. My parents had boxes of pictures, and I remembered asking my mom, "What's this one? Is that Dad? Well, what priest is that?" And she looked, "Oh, that's Father Post." And she said, "Oh, Father embarrassed me so much that day." I'm like, "Well, looks fine to me. He's just getting a blessing." Yeah, but everybody knows the first blessing of an ordained priest goes to his parents. Your father was trying to get ahead of the line, Mr. I can't wait. And she was like, "Oh." So I think he got the first blessing that day, and this is the picture from it.
Yeah, I live in a
And there was a pilgrimage, so,
which is called a
anyway.
home for unwed fathers. Okay.
My dad said you can never have too many prayers, so I think he was always happy to get a blessing, or Bishop Boulay knows that anyway, so.
When this is a
That was at your ordination.
I like this
after.
picture better.
That's for you to keep. Anyway, okay?
I was ordained in North Dakota, at Powers Lake, right there, Archbishop, of course. So you remember Fred Nelson? Remember Father Fred Nelson?
Yep.
Most of you probably heard of him at least, right? If some of you have actually seen him, Father Fred Nelson? He was so in favor of the Archbishop until he visited me once in California, trying to remember the circumstances. Anyway, what were you saying?
Sister, I've got some questions for you. Since you were part of the original group of Dominicans that came here in 1991. First of all, just in general, what was it like in the early years for St. Dominic's?
Well, in the early years when we first arrived, we drove into a dirt driveway and had a garage, a boat garage, a little house that was green, so we can have Father Couture's little comment. It was often referred to as the greenhouse, and sometimes to the confusion of those around us, we were talking about the greenhouse. And then a 3-sided metal barn, and on the other side, so where the school is now in the church, there was a little horse pasture and woods. And so we decided that the sisters would be in the house, that would be the sisters' cells. The children, the classes would be in the garage and the boat garage. The 3-sided barn became our barn cathedral for the big days when we had mass with everyone. And the boarders, because we had 4 boarders the first year, they also had a room in the house. Well, after the first day of school, when the 2nd through 6th graders, or shall I say the 4th through 6th graders, participated in the catechism class of the sister teaching the 2nd and 3rd graders, who was speaking of the 12 applesauce. It was the apostles, and it was one of the French-speaking sisters. So we decided that the 12 applesauce would not work. And some of the classes then moved into the house. So the sister cells became classes by day and sister cells at night. So we had our mattresses propped against the wall, and we didn't pay any attention to them. And the girls never made comments, but we often have asked ourselves, what did they think? Did they know what was really going on? So that was the first year, and very much help from people around. We had our excitement. We had many, many benefactors. Mother Gabriel decided that we were going to consecrate the school to the Sacred Heart for the Feast of St. Margaret Mary. And that is the story of the big dust and wind and mud storm, because we were all speckled with mud, on the 16th of October. So we had been planning for this big feast day the next day, and had mass in the barn in the morning, and we thought the barn was going to fall over because the wind and the rain, the students were howling, some of them were terrified. And when we left mass, it was dark out, so it was noon. We sent everyone home. We were advised also to leave Our dog had left, our dog had disappeared, and they told us that was sure sign. These are parishioners who wanted us to come and stay with them, and this was their way, because there were fires at the same time. So they said, well, the dog has left, dogs always smell fire, you better get out of your house. So we started packing up books, getting everything packed, because we were thinking maybe our house is going to burn down because we were surrounded by woods. We also ended up in our packing eating those cookies that we had made for the next day just to encourage ourselves. And we did end up staying the night in Post Falls at a parishioner's house. And the question was asked, Mother, do we really have to go back to school the next day? And Mother Gabriel, of course, said, yes, we are going. The Sacred Heart will win. So the next day it was sunny, the weather was fine, no fires, and we consecrated the school to the Sacred Heart. The second year, of course, so that year we had 50 students. The second year we had 100, and we had a little bit of a problem of where we were going to put them. We also had an increase of boarders. So the chapel of the first year was the entranceway of our basement with no chairs because there was no room for chairs. So Father would come through from the sacristy, which was also the confessional, which was also a sister's workroom. He would come through, the girls would back up under the stairs, make room for Father. Father would go through, everyone would go back to their places. The second year, that room became the dormitory for some of our boarders. The Kinneys kindly took half of our boarders at their house. They had moved there recently and were building a big house. But we didn't know where to put our students. We didn't know where to have school. So the Sunday before the Monday when we were supposed to start school, Father from the pulpit at ICC said, the sisters are delaying school for a week. There are a few technical difficulties. And we were up in the choir loft laughing because we thought those technical difficulties, we have no place to have school. And that's the year that we actually had school in the Protestant church that's just down the road from ICC, which ended up being very convenient for us because we could walk down to the church, the sisters, and pray during the day. The children we could have mass with them. We could use the church basement for presentations. Carrying our chairs all the way. That was a little lack that we had in the beginning. We didn't have enough chairs. We could never find enough chairs, and so we'd carry our chairs to the chapel, and we'd carry our chairs back to our rooms. And one day, sister came to the chapel late and got to her place, and there was no chairs, so she went running out to get her chair. Anyway, those are the funny stories from the beginning. So we ended up then having class in that Protestant building for a year. And then as the years went by, we kept building and kept going on that.
And what were your first impressions of the parishioners here? Take your time.
How many minutes are you giving her for that one? 2 minutes tops.
I'll just sum it up in the generosity and the kindness of them all. We had very, very, very much help from the beginning. The very first year we had Mr. Paul Bruder, for example, who would come all of the time with Andrew and Stephen and Michael and help out. So we had the boys running around, and Michael would come to the window every once in a while of the kitchen and ask what was being cooked there. Mr. Marty Brooks also, Mr. DiPolito, many helpers. There were many ladies who came to help with the laundry and the cooking, so Mrs. Maria Metcalf, Mrs. McBride, Mrs. Burgess, who helped us with our bookkeeping. Just many, many generous people. Of course, can't name them all, and many very touching details. So we have the stories of the big benefactors. Mother will touch on some of those. But there is one story where we see that God really was watching over everything in the very smallest details. So we were at dinner and arrived the plate on the table, and we had nothing to put it on because there was already one hot plate on the table. So just the remark made that, well, we do need to get more hot pads here to put our things on. And then we went to serve, and the sister took out a little soup spoon, and so we're serving with our soup spoon, and Mother said, well, it would be good to get some big spoons here. We just have to stock up our kitchen. So fine, we just went on. The next day I was cooking, and it was Friday, it was fish. And I thought, just a little bit of lemon juice for this fish, it would make it just perfect. knock at the door. Up comes someone. I do think it was Ethan's dad. I think it was Mr. Angeli, with a plastic bag, and he looked very ashamed of himself. He didn't quite know why he was dropping this plastic bag off. In the plastic bag was a hot pad, 2 serving spoons, and in the bottom, a lemon. And he was apologizing for getting rid of his stuff on us, but it was very, very touching. So.
Thank you. I think following on the education thing, I'd like to ask a couple questions of Dr. Wojnowski. Dr. Wojnowski, I remember when you first came here, of course. That was my graduating year. What were your first impressions here?
Oh, yeah. First impressions?
Yeah, your first impressions here.
Well, the scenery, after coming from Kansas, and I came, and the scenery to me was amazing, and just the mountains and the outdoors, and I don't know, there was a certain wholesomeness that I saw that really attracted me, and a certain sort of rambunctious spirit, and there was also a great desire for sort of rekindling the classical tradition and the liberal arts, and that was intended by the priests that were here, and that was a breath of fresh air to be able to sort of regain that whole tradition and teach Dante and Augustine again, and also teach St. Thomas in the philosophy course. So those are opportunities that you don't get very much, and especially at a high school. So I thought that was a unique experience, and the charm of the whole place attracted me. So, and has since.
Now, we've heard a little bit from Father Couture about the importance of the schools and how places grow when a school is attached to them. Can you give us a little more from your own understanding of what's the importance of these traditional Catholic schools like ICA?
Well, there has to be a restoration. As we look at the world around us, we see that not only is the world distorted theologically and with regard to belief, but the world, the lack of belief, the lack of Catholic faith coming directly from God has affected even the natural order of things. And it has even affected the rational order of things, where logic and reason and even belief in objective reality is totally thrown out the window. In fact, that's what they fight against in the typical school, certainly in America. So to try to, first of all, remember that there is this restoration of nature that needs to go on, this sense of the normalcy of life and the great emphasis on the institutions that make up the natural order, including the family, but also just this belief in objective reality and this belief that we can know the truth by looking at the world and using logic to understand the great truths that are all around us. And if we do, my fundamental belief has always been that if we know some truth and we come to some truth, that logic will lead us to God, to a full appreciation of the divine order, and then it opens us up to the Catholic faith. So just establishing an appreciation of the natural order, the rational order, and then topping it off with solid theology and real Catholic doctrine is absolutely necessary, because if we look at our world, we see the only thing that can bring it back to the way it was supposed to be, the way God ordained it to be, is by following the teachings that He Himself has given to us. I mean, our faith comes from God the Father, through the Son, and propagated by the Holy Ghost. So I think if we have to, all those elements have to go into our schools, and they seem like small time operations, but if you actually look at the Jesuit schools in Europe and Rome and France, and they're all 50, 100 students, and they raise some of the greatest minds, for better or for worse, in the Western tradition. So we can't look at numbers. We have to look at quality and what we're actually doing to restore the divine and natural order of things.
So another theme that seems to be running through this, as it appropriately should, is that of divine providence, which Sister just mentioned in a very concrete way, but also we've been talking about in an overarching way how divine providence has led this. So I have a question now for Jake, Mr. Everline. Sorry to use that.
We're old friends.
Yeah. You know a lot about the history of this area and the Catholicism in this area, and I was wondering, why is the establishment of ICC here in Post Falls historically significant?
So that is a very interesting question, because it is tied in with the significance of traditional Catholicism being specifically here locally, because as Dr. Hanowski said earlier, the Jesuits, through Father Desmet, Father Joseph, Father Rivali, and the other Jesuits, brought the Catholic faith here. And what's interesting, a coincidence, and Father Alphonsus brings it up in his book on Father Catherine's life, he says that it's interesting that the Jesuits established their first establishment at St. Mary's, just south of Missoula, and then the Cataldo Mission here, and there are a few other establishments as well north of Missoula. But the places where the faith was the strongest in the 1800s and leading up into the 1900s is actually where the traditional Latin Mass is today. So Victor, Montana, where our mission is south of Missoula, that's actually at Stevensville, which is where St. Mary's Mission was. The Cataldo Mission over here, is serviced by the Jesuits during the 1800s as well. So it's interesting where the faith was the strongest with the Indians and the Jesuits, and there were many really religious Jesuits as well, very holy Jesuits were there. The faith now, is being rebuilt in these areas, and I find that, very striking.
I find it also interesting thinking about those early missionaries and the extraordinary things that they did, that to their minds, I don't think they were doing anything particularly extraordinary. And I wonder if there's any parallels between that and the society in the Northwest too.
Definitely, and you'll hear that's one of my themes with my presentation later, is that, or maybe that's tomorrow, I don't know. I have so many projects. So what's interesting is what the founders of Immaculate Conception were doing is just the same what they were doing before Vatican II. It was ordinary. There was nothing extraordinary about it. They were just simply carrying on, the mission of the church, and also passing on to their children what they had received from their parents, their pastors. And so what we have received today is just simply an extension, a continuation of that.
So I know as well that you are, of course, a student of history and a longtime resident here, so I'm going to ask a somewhat bold question that you might not be able to answer, but based on your knowledge of history and your time here, what do you think the future holds?
What do I think the future holds? Well, if we look at the growth of our parish over the last 50 years, it is one of growth in numbers, but also growth in religious vocations, growth in religious foundations. So perhaps we can go to Archbishop Lefebvre for the answer, and his last letter to John O'Neill. And maybe a bishop's house is next.
And then I could add a little something to that, and I'll talk about it in my talk, but in a 1989 letter to my father, thanking him for the work with the Carmelites, he says, I don't have the quote right now, but something to the effect of, may the Carmelite convent there be a spring of many blessings for the church there, and it has been. It really has been. So.
The other thing I think is on the horizon is a new church, maybe. So every time our parish grew in size and there were too many people for our church, we got a new church. So, and I think it's almost time for that.
It's a good problem.
Might be time for a new school too.
It might be, yeah.
So for Mrs. Souza, obviously you've seen, I think, the most amount of growth and change here. Do you have any comments to that? What's it been like to see the growth and change in ICC and ICA over the years?
I think our parents, I mean, you can imagine how much has grown now up to the 50-year point, but, you know, God willing, I'll be around for the 75th. If you guys do something good, you can use what we put together for the 50th, but I'm probably not going to be here for the 100th, but I have great hope that it'll just be phenomenal. But the amount of growth is wonderful, and my parents would say, we'd say it in the beginning too, wow, so many new faces, I don't even know anybody anymore. And then you get to know more people, fine, and then more come in. And as my parents were elderly, and they would usually go to the Carmel in the later years, but then they come out to Post Falls. I don't know anybody there. So, but, you know, they would say it kind of in, like, oh, you know, the old days where you saw the video with the confirmations, the church was really small, you knew everybody in there. They would kind of that reminisce factor was disappearing for them, but it's a good thing because the next generation is coming up, and it's a beautiful problem to have to go, I don't know half of these people, but now they're part of our parish, and it's wonderful to see. So I see that constantly. I'm like, I've been here a lot, and new faces, more new faces, and it's great. You know, the classrooms are overflowing at the girls' school. The boys' school too, the Our Lady of Victory, all these things, it's just a beautiful thing to happen. And my father lovingly referred to this part of the country as God's country. He always said to say to people, you come out to the best part of the United States, it's God's country. And, you know, after this weekend and there's things I learned putting my next presentation together especially, but it is God's country, you know, it's beautiful here. So many blessings are coming to our parish.
So, yeah, and reflecting back on the history of this place, I'm think back to places where I have been, from going to actually Father Postmass in Campbell, driving an hour and a half to get there, to coming here was a very big change and difference. And I grew up here and began to take things a little bit for granted, of course. Then I went off to college in Texas, and then I went and lived in Washington, D.C. And we kind of lived through a little bit towards the end of my time there. A little bit, I thought I was living my parents' life as we were having Mass in a hotel room, and then Mass in a funeral home before we came back here. So I learned a little bit more too about how not to take so much this for granted, and how blessed we have been here. So I want to thank all of you here for your time and your answers and your efforts and devotion throughout the years, and say that so many like me have profited so much, and hopefully will continue to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tardif. Thank you, speakers, for joining us. We are going to take a break. The next speech is at 2:15. So, thank you.